In front of a respected millionaire, a young girl dared to raise her voice. With conviction, she said, "When I grow up, I will be your wife." He smiled, not imagining that the promise would survive pain and fate. 10 years later, the young woman returns, and what happens is surprising. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. The California summer sun beat down on Meredith Campbell as she stared up at the imposing glass structure that housed Apex Innovations, one of Silicon Valley's fastest-growing tech companies. Her heart pounded against her ribs, not from fear, but from a strange certainty that had taken root in her 10-year-old mind. The kind of certainty only children possess before life teaches them to doubt. Meredith? Her mother called from their modest pickup truck, where her father was apologizing to the security guard for his daughter's impulsive dash through the main gate. "Come back this instant." But Meredith had already made it to the main entrance. The automatic doors parted before her like magic, welcoming her into a world of polished marble and gleaming steel. The receptionist looked up, startled to see a young girl with unruly auburn braids and a summer dress that had seen better days standing confidently in the corporate lobby. "May I help you?" the receptionist asked, her perfectly manicured fingers hovering over a phone ready to call security. "I need to see Mr. Hayes," Meredith announced, her voice surprisingly steady. "It's important." The woman's eyebrows rose. "Do you have an appointment with Mr. Hayes?" "No, but he'll want to see me," Meredith replied with the unwavering confidence that only childhood provides. "I promise." Perhaps it was the earnestness in her eyes or the sheer unexpectedness of the situation, but against all corporate protocol, the receptionist made the call. Minutes later, the elevator doors opened and a tall man in his early 30s stepped out. Daniel Hayes, founder and CEO of Apex Innovations, had the kind of presence that filled a room without effort. His tailored suit and focused gaze spoke of a man who had built something substantial from nothing but ideas and determination. He approached with measured steps, curious rather than annoyed. "I understand there's someone here to see me." His eyes found Meredith and he couldn't hide his surprise. Business meetings with elementary school students weren't exactly common in his schedule. "That's me." "Sir?" Meredith stepped forward, extending her hand the way she'd seen her father do when meeting important people. "I'm Meredith Campbell." Daniel shook her hand, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Campbell. What can I do for you today?" Meredith took a deep breath. This was the moment that would define everything. "Mr. Hayes, I came to tell you something important." She squared her small shoulders and looked him directly in the eyes. "When I grow up, I'm going to be your wife." The lobby fell silent. The receptionist's jaw dropped slightly. Two executives waiting for the elevator froze mid-conversation. But Daniel Hayes didn't laugh. Something in the child's direct gaze made the declaration more than a childish fantasy. It was stated as an inevitability, like tomorrow's sunrise. He crouched down to meet her at eye level, his expression thoughtful. "That's quite a statement, Miss Campbell. May I ask why?" "Because you built all this," she gestured around the lobby, "from nothing. My dad says you're the smartest man in Silicon Valley, and because I saw your picture in the magazine at my dentist's office and I just knew." She touched her heart. "When you know something here, you don't need reasons." Before Daniel could respond, Meredith's parents burst through the entrance, faces flushed with embarrassment. "Mr. Hayes, we are so sorry," her father began, placing a protective hand on Meredith's shoulder. "Our daughter sometimes lets her imagination run away with her." "She climbed out of the truck when we slowed down at the gate," her mother explained, mortified. "We were just delivering supplies to the campus cafeteria." Daniel stood up, still processing the girl's declaration. "It's quite all right, Mr. and Mrs. Campbell. Your daughter is very determined." Meredith apologized to Mr. Hayes for bothering him, her father insisted. But Meredith shook her head. "I'm not sorry. I meant what I said." Her green eyes flashed with conviction. "When I grow up, I'll come back and I'll be your wife." Daniel Hayes studied her for a moment, then made a decision that surprised even himself. "Miss Campbell," he said with unexpected seriousness, "I appreciate your directness. It's a quality that's rare these days." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, handing it to Meredith. "Tell you what, hold on to this. If you still feel the same way when you're older, you're welcome to come find me." Her small fingers closed around the card as if it were made of gold. "I will." Her parents hurried her toward the exit, murmuring more apologies. Just before leaving, Meredith turned back to look at the executive balcony overlooking the main lobby. "I'll be back," she called, her voice echoing across the marble floor. Daniel watched her go, strangely moved by the encounter. At 32, he'd built Apex Innovations from a garage startup to a company valued at over $1 billion. He'd faced down skeptical investors, navigated market crashes, and outmaneuvered aggressive competitors. But somehow this small girl's absolute certainty had caught him completely off guard. "Should I have security update their protocols, sir?" his assistant asked, appearing at his side. Daniel shook his head, still watching the family's truck pull away through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "No, Mark. Sometimes the unexpected visitors are the most memorable." He returned to his office, settling behind his desk to prepare for his next meeting. But his thoughts kept drifting back to those determined green eyes and the absolute conviction in that young voice. In his world of algorithms and probabilities, such certainty was both refreshing and unsettling. Later that evening, as Daniel's private car took him home to his modern hillside house overlooking Palo Alto, he found himself telling the story to his close friend and CFO, James Parker. "And she just announced she was going to marry you?" James laughed. "That's priceless." There was something about her, James, not the usual starry-eyed kid stuff. Daniel gazed out at the sunset, painting the Silicon Valley landscape in gold. It was like she'd done the math and calculated the outcome already. "You're not actually taking this seriously, are you?" James raised an eyebrow. "She's just a kid with a crush on a guy she saw in a magazine." Daniel smiled. "Of course not. But in a world where everyone's trying to predict the future, markets, technologies, consumer behavior, it's interesting to meet someone who speaks about it with absolute certainty." "Well, I'd better be your best man at this future wedding," James teased. Daniel laughed and changed the subject. But that night, before going to bed, he placed the girl's school photo that security had captured on their cameras into his desk drawer. Not because he believed in her prediction, but because her audacity reminded him of himself at that age, convinced that the impossible was merely waiting for someone stubborn enough to make it happen. Little did he know that 11 years would reshape both their lives in ways neither could have predicted, and that a childhood promise would become the foundation for a love story that would test the limits of grief, trust, and second chances. 11 years passed like turning pages in a book, some chapters lingering longer than others, some barely remembered once completed. In that time, Daniel Hayes transformed Apex Innovations from a promising startup into a technological empire. The company's headquarters expanded from a single glass tower to a sprawling campus in the heart of Silicon Valley, complete with research labs, innovation centers, and logistics hubs that employed over 5,000 people. At 43, Daniel had become the kind of success story that business schools used as case studies, the visionary who saw beyond current markets to create products people didn't yet know they needed. His net worth had multiplied exponentially, but more importantly, his companies were changing the landscape of American industry. With professional success came personal milestones as well. 5 years after the curious encounter with the girl from the delivery truck, Daniel met Catherine Bennett at a charity gala in San Francisco. She was a pediatric surgeon with kind eyes and a laugh that made everyone around her feel instantly at ease. Unlike the ambitious socialites who typically gravitated toward him at such events, Catherine spoke about her patients with genuine passion, never once mentioning his company or fortune. "You haven't asked me about what I do," Daniel remarked as they shared a quiet moment on the venue's balcony, away from the crowd. Catherine smiled. "I know who you are, Mr. Hayes. Everyone does. I'm more interested in who you are when you're not being Daniel Hayes, tech mogul extraordinaire." That question, who he was beyond the boardroom, had caught him off guard. In the world he inhabited, most people wanted something from him: funding, connections, or the prestige of his company's name. Catherine wanted conversation. Their courtship was swift but meaningful. Within a year, they were married in an intimate ceremony at his estate in the hills above Palo Alto. The house, once a showcase of modern architecture, designed primarily to impress visitors, became a home under Catherine's influence. She filled the sterile spaces with warmth, books that were actually read, not just displayed, Comfortable furniture meant for living, not just admiring, and photographs that captured moments rather than achievements. I've been interviewed for Fortune magazine 4 times, Daniel told her one evening as they sat on their terrace watching the sunset. But I've never felt more seen than when you look at me. Catherine squeezed his hand. That's because I'm looking at Daniel, not the CEO of Apex Innovations. For the first time since founding his company, Daniel found himself leaving the office at reasonable hours. The man who once scheduled meetings during dinner now turned his phone off at the table. Catherine had shown him that there was life beyond the empire he'd built. A quieter, gentler existence that brought its own rewards. When Catherine announced her pregnancy 18 months into their marriage, Daniel experienced a joy he hadn't known was possible. He converted one of the home's many unused rooms into a nursery, personally overseeing every detail from the scientific accuracy of the solar system painted on the ceiling to the bookshelf filled with the classics he hoped to read to his child. For someone who delegates everything at work, you're remarkably hands-on with this nursery, Catherine teased as she watched him assemble a crib, refusing help from the household staff. This is different, he said simply. This matters more. As Catherine entered her 3rd trimester, Daniel scaled back his work commitments even further, arranging to handle more business remotely. He attended every doctor's appointment, downloaded pregnancy apps, and read parenting books with the same intensity he once reserved for market analyses. The nursery was completed, baby clothes washed and organized, and a birth plan carefully drafted. But life, as Daniel would soon learn, followed no business plan. The storm came suddenly one October evening, the kind of rare, violent California deluge that floods roads and downs power lines. Catherine, home alone while Daniel attended an unavoidable board meeting in the city, called him when her contractions began. 2 months earlier than expected. I'm leaving now, he told her, his heart racing. Stay calm. I'll be there in 30 minutes. But 30 minutes became an hour as fallen trees blocked roads. The power went out across the region. Cell service became spotty. And by the time Daniel finally reached their home, navigating flooded streets and downed power lines, Catherine was in advanced labor. The ambulance can't get through, she gasped between contractions. The roads are completely blocked. Daniel called Catherine's colleague from the hospital, Dr. Ramsey, who tried to talk him through what needed to be done. With the household staff's help and a patchy video call to the doctor, they created a makeshift delivery room in their bedroom. Catherine, despite her medical training and pain, remained the calmest person in the room. It's going to be okay, she kept saying, squeezing Daniel's hand. We can do this. The baby boy arrived in the early hours of morning, tiny, perfect, and struggling to breathe. By dawn, when emergency crews finally cleared the roads enough for an ambulance to reach them, Catherine had developed complications that even she, with her medical knowledge, couldn't fully diagnose. Take care of him first, she insisted as paramedics assessed the situation. Make sure he's stable. At the hospital, doctors worked frantically to save both mother and child. The baby was rushed to the NICU, while Catherine underwent emergency surgery. For 3 days, Daniel moved between 2 hospital rooms, watching his wife grow weaker, even as his son fought to grow stronger. On the 4th day, as Daniel held Catherine's hand and promised her they would get through this, her eyes closed for the final time. 3 days later, despite the most advanced medical intervention Silicon Valley's wealth could provide, their son's tiny heart stopped beating. In less than a week, Daniel Hayes, the man who had built an empire by controlling every variable, predicting every outcome, lost the 2 people who had made that empire meaningful. The funeral was private, attended only by closest friends and family. The press, normally ravenous for details of the tech mogul's life, respectfully kept their distance after a statement from Apex Innovations' PR department requested privacy during Mr. Hayes' time of profound personal loss. When Daniel returned to his home after the services, he walked past the nursery door, closed it firmly and never opened it again. Within days, he had contractors convert it into a home office, the blue skies and stars painted over with neutral gray, the carefully selected furniture donated to charity, the tiny clothes and toys packed away in storage. James Parker, who had been managing the company in Daniel's absence, found him at his desk at 5:30 the following Monday morning. reviewing quarterly projections as if the past month had never happened. "Daniel," James said gently, "no one expects you back yet." "The Q4 numbers need attention," Daniel replied without looking up. "And the Cambridge acquisition is still pending approval. The company will survive if you take some time." Daniel finally met his friend's concerned gaze. "Time for what, James? To sit in that house with all its empty rooms? To remember what I've lost? Work is the only thing that makes sense now." And so Daniel Hayes retreated into the one world he could still control. Under his renewed, almost obsessive focus, Apex Innovations expanded even further. New patents were filed, subsidiaries launched, and revenues soared. He worked 16-hour days, took meetings on weekends, and pushed his executive team to their limits. The company grew, but Daniel shrank, becoming a shadow of the man who had once found balance. His home remained immaculate but untouched, maintained by staff who rarely saw their employer. The warmth that Catherine had infused into those spaces faded, leaving behind the pristine, impersonal showcase it had been before her arrival. For 5 years following his loss, Daniel rebuffed all attempts at matchmaking from well-meaning friends. His rare appearances at social functions were strictly business. His interactions with women limited to professional contexts. The press eventually stopped speculating about his personal life, instead focusing on his business innovations and philanthropic initiatives, the only aspects of himself he was willing to share with the world. Until one spring afternoon, when his assistant announced an unexpected visitor, a young woman who claimed to have met him once, 11 years ago, and who insisted he would remember her. While Daniel built his empire in Silicon Valley, Meredith Campbell's life took its own winding path in San Francisco. The business card he had given her that summer day remained her most treasured possession, protected in a small frame on her nightstand, a daily reminder of a promise made and a future envisioned. Her parents had dismissed the encounter as childhood fancy, expecting her to outgrow her fixation on the tech entrepreneur. They had moved to the city shortly after the delivery job at Apex Innovations, her father securing a position as a facilities manager at one of San Francisco's prestigious private schools. The new job came with an unexpected benefit, a substantial tuition reduction for faculty children. Thus, at 11 years old, Meredith found herself enrolled at Westridge Academy for Young Women, an institution that had educated the daughters of California's elite for generations. The transition from her modest public school to Westridge's ivy-covered campus wasn't easy. Her classmates spoke of summer homes in the Hamptons and winter breaks in Aspen, while Meredith had never left California. "Campbell?" a girl named Victoria had asked during her first week, examining Meredith's simple clothing with barely concealed disdain. "I don't recognize that name. What does your family do?" Meredith had straightened her shoulders, channeling the confidence she'd felt in Daniel Hayes's lobby. "My father manages the school facilities, and my mother is a nurse at San Francisco General. And someday I'm going to marry Daniel Hayes." The laughter that followed haunted her through the hallways for months. Hayes's bride, they called her, a nickname meant to wound. But Meredith, with the peculiar resilience of the deeply certain, absorbed the mockery and transformed it into determination. If she was going to be the wife of one of Silicon Valley's most brilliant minds, she would become worthy of standing beside him. She threw herself into her studies with ferocious intensity, spending hours in the library that other girls spent at social events. Her grades climbed steadily until she ranked first in her class by freshman year. Mrs. Winters, the school's formidable headmistress, called her parents in for a meeting that spring. "Mr. and Mrs. Campbell," she said, folding her hands on her mahogany desk, "Meredith has shown remarkable academic progress. Her aptitude tests place her significantly above her grade level." Her father beamed with pride. "She's always been a determined girl." "Indeed," Mrs. Winters smiled thinly. "However, I'm concerned about her social development. She has few friends, declines invitations to school functions, and spends her lunch periods in the library. When I asked her about her goals, she spoke of a rather unusual personal ambition involving a certain tech industry figure." Her mother sighed. "That's our fault. Years ago, she had a brief encounter with Daniel Hayes. She was just a child, but for some reason, the meeting left quite an impression." "I see." The headmistress leaned forward. "Perhaps we should channel this fixation into something productive. Meredith shows particular promise in mathematics and languages. With the right guidance, these talents could open doors to excellent universities and impressive careers of her own. And so began Meredith's carefully curated education. The school arranged advanced placement classes, language immersion programs, and summer internships at museums and cultural institutions. Her parents, seeing their daughter thrive, academically even as they worried about her singular focus on a childhood promise, supported these endeavors. By 16, Meredith spoke fluent French and conversational Mandarin, played the piano with technical precision if not passion, and had mastered the social graces taught in Westridge's infamous etiquette seminars. She learned which fork to use at formal dinners, how to make appropriate conversation with dignitaries, and the art of tasteful correspondence. Yet beneath this polished exterior, her heart remained anchored to that summer day and the business card in its frame. Each night before sleep, she would touch the glass, protecting it, and whisper, "Someday." Occasionally, Daniel Hayes appeared, in the news or in the business magazines her father brought home. Meredith collected these mentions, creating a scrapbook that tracked his professional rise. When reports of his marriage to Catherine Bennett surfaced, Meredith experienced her first true crisis of faith. She locked herself in her room for a full weekend, emerging with reddened eyes but renewed resolve. "He married someone else," her mother said gently, hoping this reality would finally break the spell. "For now," Meredith replied with quiet certainty. When news of the tragedy that took Catherine and the baby reached her through a newspaper, her father had left on the kitchen table, Meredith felt no triumph, only a deep aching sorrow for Daniel's loss. She sent a condolence card to Apex Innovations headquarters, unsigned except for a small drawing of a pickup truck in the corner. Whether he ever received it, she never knew. As college application season approached in her senior year, Meredith found herself at another crossroads. With her exemplary academic record and glowing recommendations from Westridge faculty, she could aim for any university in the country. "Harvard has shown significant interest," her college counselor noted during their planning session. "Your essay on technological innovation in healthcare settings impressed them greatly. Stanford and MIT are also strong possibilities." "Stanford," Meredith said without hesitation. "I need to be in California." The counselor sighed, clearly aware of the unspoken reason. "Meredith, you have extraordinary potential. Your future shouldn't be defined by childhood fancies." "It's not fancy," Meredith replied calmly. "It's certainty." She was accepted to Stanford with a partial scholarship, her parents covering the remaining tuition with careful budgeting and additional work hours. She chose a double major in business administration and computer science, subjects that would allow her to understand Daniel's world from the inside. College brought new challenges and, unexpectedly, friendships. Her roommate Lily Chen was the first person who didn't mock Meredith's unwavering conviction about her future with Daniel Hayes. "That's actually kind of romantic," Lily said one night after Meredith had finally shared the full story. "Weird but romantic, like something from an old movie." "You don't think I'm crazy?" Meredith asked, surprised by the lack of judgment. Lily shrugged. "My grandmother's marriage was arranged when she was 3 years old. She didn't meet my grandfather until their wedding day, and they had one of the happiest marriages I've ever seen. Who am I to say what makes sense when it comes to finding your person?" With Lily's friendship came others, and for the first time Meredith experienced a social life beyond her studies. She went to parties, joined clubs, and even dated occasionally, brief, relationships that inevitably ended when the young men realized they were competing with an unshakable conviction. "It's not fair to either of us," she explained gently to her most persistent suitor, the son of a tech venture capitalist who had pursued her for months. "You deserve someone whose heart is fully available." "He doesn't even know you exist," the young man argued, frustrated by her rejection. "You're chasing a fantasy." "Perhaps," she conceded, "but it's my fantasy to chase." As her 21st birthday approached, Meredith felt a growing restlessness. She had followed her carefully plotted educational path, developed the skills and knowledge she believed would make her a suitable partner for a man of Daniel's caliber, but the promise remained unfulfilled. One evening, as she and Lily shared dinner in their off-campus apartment, Meredith made her decision. "I'm going to see him," she announced, setting down her fork with deliberate precision. Lily looked up from her textbook. "Hayes? Now? Why?" "Because it's time." Meredith's voice held the same certainty it had 11 years earlier in the Apex Innovations lobby. "I've become the person I needed to be. I understand his world now. I can stand beside him as an equal, not just a starry-eyed girl." "What if he doesn't remember you?" Lily asked gently. "Or worse, what if he remembers you and still says no?" Meredith had considered these possibilities 1,000 times. Then at least I'll know. Living with rejection would be easier than living with uncertainty. The next day, she withdrew most of her savings, packed a single suitcase with her most carefully selected clothes, and boarded a train to Palo Alto. She had researched Daniel's current address, not the hillside home he had shared with Catherine, but a new estate he'd purchased after his loss, a modern mansion secluded behind gates and gardens at the edge of the city. As the train carried her south, doubts crept in for the first time. What if her entire life had been built around a misinterpretation of a kind gesture to a precocious child? What if he looked at her with pity, or worse, amusement? What if her certainty had been nothing more than delusion? She arrived in Palo Alto by early afternoon and checked into a modest hotel near the station. After refreshing herself, she took a taxi to the Apex Innovations campus, now a sprawling complex of buildings far more extensive than the single tower she remembered. "I'd like to see Mr. Hayes," she told the receptionist, a different woman from 11 years ago, in a lobby far more imposing. "Do you have an appointment?" the woman asked without looking up from her screen. "No," Meredith admitted, "but I think he'll want to see me." The receptionist gave her a practiced smile. "Mr. Hayes only sees visitors with appointments, and his calendar is booked for the next 3 months. You're welcome to contact his scheduling team to request a meeting." Meredith had anticipated this response. "Please tell him that Meredith Campbell is here. Mention that we met 11 years ago when I made him a promise in this lobby." Something in her tone must have conveyed her determination, because the receptionist's professional facade faltered slightly. She made the call, speaking quietly into her headset. After a brief conversation, she looked back at Meredith with new interest. "Mr. Hayes is currently in meetings until 5 o'clock. His assistant suggests you return then, or tomorrow morning at 9. "I'll come back at 5, Meredith replied, her heart racing with the confirmation that he had remembered, or at least was curious enough to agree to see her. She spent the intervening hours walking around the campus perimeter, watching employees come and go, studying the buildings that housed Daniel's corporate vision. By the time she returned to the lobby, the workday crowd had thinned considerably. "Miss Campbell?" A man in his late 30s approached her. "I'm Mark Wilson, Mr. Hayes' chief of staff. He asked me to bring you to his office." As the elevator rose to the top floor, Meredith's certainty wavered. In a few moments, she would face the man around whom she had organized her entire life. What if he wasn't the person she had constructed in her mind? What if she wasn't the woman she believed herself to be? The elevator doors opened to a reception, area finished in glass and steel, with views of the Santa Cruz Mountains in the distance. Mark led her through double doors into a corner office where, silhouetted against the setting sun, Daniel Hayes stood waiting. Daniel Hayes had changed in the 11 years since their first meeting. The youthful energy that had once animated his features had been replaced by a more weathered intensity. Fine lines bracketed his eyes and mouth, evidence of both accomplishment and loss. His dark hair was now threaded with silver at the temples, and he carried himself with the careful composure of someone who had learned that control was both necessity and illusion. "Miss Campbell," he said, his voice deeper than she remembered. "Please come in." Meredith stepped forward, acutely aware of the contrast between them, his bespoke suit and her simple dress, his commanding presence and her nervous determination. But she held his gaze steadily, refusing to be diminished by the opulence surrounding them. "You remember me," she said, half statement, half question. A flicker of something, Amusement, recognition, crossed his face. Not immediately, I admit. When Mark mentioned your name and a promise made in our lobby, I had to search my memory. He gestured to a sitting area near the windows. Please have a seat. They sat across from each other, the silence between them filled with the weight of years and expectations, his cautious, hers fervent. You've grown up, he observed, studying her with clinical detachment. That was always the plan, Meredith replied, finding her voice. I told you I would return when I was grown. Daniel leaned back, his expression guarded. Ah, yes, the marriage proposal from a 10-year-old. I'd forgotten the specifics. The dismissive tone stung, but Meredith had prepared for this moment too carefully to be deterred. I was young, but I meant what I said. I still do. He raised an eyebrow. You can't possibly be serious. I've never been more serious about anything, she countered. I've spent the last 11 years becoming someone worthy of standing beside you. Miss Campbell, he began, his voice taking on the patient tone adults use with children. Despite her evident maturity, that's flattering but rather naive. You don't know me. You've constructed a fantasy based on magazine profiles and business reports. Then give me the chance to know the real you, she challenged. Not the public figure or the business genius. The man. Daniel stood abruptly and walked to the windows, gazing out at his corporate domain. The man is not available for getting to know, Miss Campbell. I've built a life that suits me. Work, achievement, solitude when necessary. There's no room for romantic entanglements. Because of Catherine, Meredith said softly. He turned sharply, his composure cracking for the first time. You know about my wife? I followed your career, she admitted. Both the triumphs and the challenges. I was deeply sorry for your loss. Something in her tone must have conveyed genuine empathy, because his defensive posture eased slightly. Thank you, but that doesn't change anything. Your persistence is remarkable but misplaced. You should direct it toward building your own life, not attaching yourself to mine. I have built my own life, Meredith replied with quiet dignity. I graduated top of my class at Westridge Academy. I'm at Stanford now, double majoring in business and computer science. I speak 3 languages and can discuss everything from quantum computing to Renaissance art. I didn't spend the last decade pining in a tower. I spent it becoming someone of substance. Daniel regarded her with new interest. Impressive credentials, which begs the question, why waste them pursuing a childhood fantasy? Because some certainties transcend logic, she said simply. I can't explain it any more than you can explain how you knew Apex would succeed when every analyst predicted its failure. The comparison gave him pause. Before he could respond, his phone chimed with an urgent message. He glanced at it and frowned. I have a situation that requires my attention, he said, already shifting back into CEO mode. And I assume you need to return to campus. Actually, I've taken a leave of absence, Meredith replied. I'm staying at the Palo Alto Inn. Daniel looked genuinely surprised. You're quite committed to this encounter. I told you, this matters to me. He studied her for a long moment, then made a decision that would alter both their lives. The Palo Alto Inn is undergoing renovations. Half the rooms are unusable, and they've been overbooking the rest. Meredith nodded. My room is fine, just small. Nevertheless, he continued, I have a guest house that's sitting empty. As a courtesy, and because I'm curious about the woman who has organized her life around a chance meeting, I'm offering it to you, temporarily. The invitation was so unexpected that Meredith momentarily lost her carefully maintained composure. You want me to stay at your home? In the guest house, he clarified. It's entirely separate from the main residence. You'll have privacy and so will I. Consider it a professional courtesy. Professional. His expression remained unreadable. You've clearly put considerable thought and effort into your education. I respect dedication, even when I find its object questionable. Think of it as one Stanford business mind offering hospitality to another. Meredith recognized the offer for what it was, not acceptance of her feelings, but curiosity about the person she had become. It wasn't everything she'd hoped for, but it was a beginning. Thank you, she said simply. I accept. An hour later, Daniel's driver delivered them to his estate, a sprawling modern structure of glass, stone, and steel nestled among ancient oak trees. Unlike the warm family home he had created with Catherine, this residence projected strength and solitude, designed to keep the world at a distance. Mrs. Ellison manages the household, Daniel explained as they walked up the curved driveway. She'll show you to the guest house and see to your needs. As if summoned by her name, a woman in her 60s appeared at the front door. Her iron-gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her expression conveyed polite surprise at the unexpected visitor. Mrs. Ellison, this is Miss Campbell. She'll be staying in the guest house for a few days, while her hotel completes some renovations. Please see that she's comfortable. The housekeeper's eyebrows rose slightly, but her professional demeanor never faltered. Of course, Mr. Hayes. Will Miss Campbell be joining you for dinner? Daniel checked his watch. I have calls with our Tokyo office tonight. Please arrange for meals to be sent to the guest house. With that, he nodded formally to Meredith and disappeared into the house, leaving her with the clearly curious Mrs. Ellison. This way, Miss Campbell, the older woman said, leading her along a stone path that wound through immaculate gardens to a smaller building set apart from the main house. Mr. Hayes rarely has guests, so you'll find everything quite pristine. The guest house, while modest compared to the mansion, was larger than most apartments Meredith had seen. Its open floor plan featured a comfortable living area, a small kitchen, and a bedroom with an adjoining bath. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out on a Japanese-inspired garden, creating a sense of serenity. It's lovely, Meredith said, setting down her suitcase. Thank you for preparing it. Mrs. Ellison studied her with shrewd eyes. May I ask how you know Mr. Hayes, Miss Campbell? We met many years ago, Meredith replied carefully. I was just a child then. I see. The housekeeper's tone suggested she saw more than Meredith had revealed. Mr. Hayes is a private man, especially since the tragedy. He doesn't bring visitors here. Not personal ones, at least. Meredith recognized the subtle warning in these words. I understand. I don't wish to intrude on his privacy or his grief. Mrs. Ellison's expression softened slightly. Grief has many faces, Miss Campbell. Mr. Hayes has chosen to wear his like armor. Perhaps that's necessary for a man in his position. She moved toward the door. I'll have dinner sent over at 7. Is there anything you don't eat? To know I'm not particular. Left alone, Meredith unpacked her few belongings and tried to process the day's events. She was on Daniel Hayes' property, closer to him than she had been in 11 years, yet still separated by walls both physical and emotional. The next morning, Meredith woke early, drawn by the California sunshine streaming through the guest house windows. After a quick shower, she dressed in a simple but elegant outfit, a pair of tailored trousers and a silk blouse that suggested competence without trying too hard. At precisely 7:30, she made her way to the main house, where she found Mrs. Ellison preparing breakfast in the expansive kitchen. Good morning, Meredith greeted the housekeeper. I was hoping to thank Mr. Hayes for his hospitality before he leaves for the office. He's already in his home study on a conference call, Mrs. Ellison replied, sliding a cup of coffee across the counter. He typically leaves for the office around 8:30. I see. Meredith tried to hide her disappointment. Is there anything I can do to help around the house? I don't want to impose without contributing. The housekeeper assessed her with that same shrewd gaze. Can you organize files? Mr. Hayes has a library full of documents that need proper cataloging. Old reports, correspondence, architectural plans. It's a project I've never had time to tackle properly. I'd be happy to help, Meredith replied, recognizing the offer for what it was, a test of her intentions and abilities. After a light breakfast, Mrs. Ellison led her to the library, a wood-paneled room lined with shelves holding books, binders, and boxes of documents. Unlike the rest of the house, with its minimalist aesthetic and emotional distance, this room felt almost lived in. Mr. Hayes comes here sometimes in the evenings, Mrs. Ellison explained, confirming Meredith's impression. It's the one room he didn't have the designers completely overhaul after he bought the property. Meredith ran her fingers along the spines of leather-bound volumes. I'll be careful not to disturb anything important. I trust you will. The housekeeper paused at the door. Miss Campbell, whatever brought you here, whatever you're hoping to find, remember that healing follows no schedule, especially for those who deny they need it. With that cryptic comment, Mrs. Ellison left Meredith alone among Daniel's books and papers. Meredith began the task of sorting and organizing, finding a genuine pleasure in bringing order to the collection. As she worked, she occasionally discovered personal items tucked between files, a ticket stub from a jazz concert, a pressed leaf, small artifacts of a life lived beyond boardrooms and balance sheets. In the early afternoon, as she carefully arranged a shelf of technical manuals, Meredith discovered a small silver frame that had fallen behind a row of books. When she retrieved it, she found herself looking at a photograph of Daniel, with a beautiful dark-haired woman whose smile transformed her elegant features into something luminous. Catherine. Meredith was so absorbed in studying the photograph that she didn't hear footsteps approaching. When she looked up, Daniel stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable as he saw what she held. "I found it behind the books," she explained quickly. "I wasn't prying." "It's fine," his voice was tight. "I wondered where that had gone." Meredith carefully wiped the dust from the frame and placed it on the desk. She was beautiful. "Yes," a single syllable heavy with memory. "You must miss her very much." Daniel entered the room fully, his gaze fixed on the photograph. "Every day, but I've learned to live with absence." "Living with absence isn't the same as living," Meredith observed softly. His eyes snapped to hers, a flash of anger quickly controlled. "You're very young to be dispensing wisdom about loss, Miss Campbell." "I'm not claiming wisdom," she replied. "Just making an observation. You've built an empire, but you live like a caretaker in your own home, maintaining everything perfectly while connecting to nothing." "Careful," he warned. "You're a guest here, not my therapist." "I apologize," Meredith said, genuinely contrite. "That was presumptuous." Daniel's posture relaxed slightly. He picked up the photograph, studying it with a complex mixture of emotions crossing his face. "I still love her, you know. That hasn't changed with time." "I wouldn't expect it to," Meredith said. "Love doesn't expire with the person who inspired it." He looked at her with new interest. "That's an insightful perspective. But I do wonder," she continued, choosing her words carefully, "if honoring love means preserving it in amber or allowing it to transform you." Daniel set the photograph down and moved to the window, his back to her. "The question," he said after a long pause, "is whether I'm hiding behind her memory to avoid risking that kind of loss again." The admission, so unexpected and vulnerable, hung between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. 3 days passed in an unexpected rhythm. Meredith continued organizing the library, finding satisfaction in bringing order to the collection of documents that chronicled both Daniel's professional achievements and his occasional personal interests. Mrs. Ellison watched her work with growing approval, sometimes joining her to share insights about the household and, carefully, about its owner. "He wasn't always this closed off," the housekeeper confided, as they sorted through a box of architectural drawings. "When he was married to Catherine, this place had life. Dinner parties, weekend gatherings, music in the evenings. She brought balance to his intensity." "What was she like?" Meredith asked, genuinely curious about the woman who had won Daniel's heart. Mrs. Ellison smiled slightly. "Warm, brilliant in her own right, but never competitive with him. She had this way of cutting through his work obsession with a simple question or observation that would make him stop and really see what was around him." The older woman paused, studying Meredith. "You remind me of her sometimes, in small ways." "I'm not trying to replace her," Meredith said quickly. "No one could," Mrs. Ellison replied. "But that doesn't mean there isn't room for something new, something different." Daniel himself remained an elusive presence. He left early each morning for the office and returned late, occasionally nodding to Meredith if they passed in the hallway, but maintaining a careful distance. She respected his boundaries, never approaching him directly, allowing him to process her presence at his own pace. On the 4th morning, Meredith was surprised when Daniel appeared at the guest house door just after sunrise. He was dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, rather than his usual suit, a transformation that somehow made him seem both more approachable and more handsome. "I've been remiss as a host," he said without preamble. "I thought you might like to see what I do, beyond what appears in press releases and annual reports." Meredith tried to contain her surprise at this unexpected overture. "I'd like that very much." "Good, we leave in 20 minutes. She dressed quickly in a simple white shirt and dark pants, pulling her hair back into a neat ponytail. When she joined Daniel at his car, a sleek but understated luxury sedan. He gave her an appraising look. "Practical choice," he commented, opening the passenger door for her. Most women would have overthought the wardrobe for this invitation. "I'm not most women," she replied evenly. "And I assumed we'd be touring facilities, not attending galas." A hint of a smile touched his mouth. Correct assumption. As they drove through the morning light, Daniel began to speak about Apex Innovations in a way business magazines never captured, not as a corporate entity, but as his life's work, a vision made tangible through determination and strategic risk. "The first building was all we could afford," he said as they approached the campus. "I mortgaged everything, convinced investors to take chances they ordinarily wouldn't, and worked nights repairing the cooling systems myself because we couldn't afford maintenance contracts." Meredith listened intently, absorbing details she'd never find in any article. "When did you know it would succeed?" "I always knew," he said without arrogance, merely stating a fact. "The question was whether I could convince everyone else before the money ran out." They spent the morning touring facilities that weren't part of the standard corporate tour, research labs where prototypes were tested, manufacturing floors where ideas became products, and logistics centers that distributed Apex technology across the globe. Throughout, Daniel introduced her to key employees, explained processes, and revealed the complex ecosystem he had created. What struck Meredith most was how different he seemed here, more animated, more present, his eyes lighting up when describing a particularly elegant solution to a technical problem. This was Daniel in his element, surrounded by the tangible results of his vision. "Your employees respect you," she observed during a break between tours, "not just as the boss, but as someone who understands what they do." "I make it my business to understand every aspect of the company," he replied. "I can't lead what I don't comprehend." By midday, they had covered the main campus facilities. Rather than heading back, Daniel drove them to a more secluded location at the edge of corporate property. A modern glass structure built into a hillside, surrounded by carefully landscaped gardens. "This isn't on any company map," Meredith noted as they parked. "Because it's not, strictly speaking, company property," Daniel explained. "It's personal. Come, I'll show you." He led her through a discreet entrance into what appeared to be a private sanctuary, a multi-level garden with flowing water features, meditation spaces, and panoramic views of the valley below. The space felt intimate yet expansive, a perfect balance of natural elements and architectural precision. "I come here to think when problems seem insurmountable," Daniel said as they walked along a stone path between flowering shrubs. "Sometimes the answers don't emerge in boardrooms or spreadsheets." They settled on a bench beneath a Japanese maple, its red leaves creating a canopy above them. For the first time since her arrival, Daniel seemed completely at ease, the corporate armor temporarily set aside. "Why did you really come back, Meredith?" he asked, using her first name for the first time. The truth, not the childhood promise narrative. The directness of the question caught her off guard, but she responded with equal honesty. "Because I needed to know if the certainty I've carried was real or imagined. I needed to see who you actually are, not the person I've constructed in my mind. And I needed to discover if there could be something genuine between us. And what have you found so far?" Meredith considered her answer carefully. "I've found a man who has achieved extraordinary things, but lives in self-imposed isolation, who creates spaces of remarkable beauty, but rarely allows himself to enjoy them, who inspires loyalty in everyone around him, but keeps them at arm's length." She paused, gathering courage. "And I've found that I still feel something profound when I'm near you, though I wouldn't yet call it love. It's a beginning, a potential." Daniel studied her face, searching for any sign of calculation or artifice. Finding none, he asked, "And what do you want from me exactly?" "Honesty," she said simply. "Not promises or declarations. Just the truth about what you feel, what you fear, what you might be willing to explore." He was silent for a long moment, the gentle sound of water flowing over stones filling the space between them. "I respect your directness," he finally said. "It's refreshing in a world where most people want something from me, but wrap their desires in flattery and misdirection." "Is that a non-answer?" She pressed gently. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Perceptive. Yes, perhaps it was." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. The truth is that I don't know what I feel. You've disrupted a carefully maintained equilibrium. I've spent years building walls around certain aspects of my life, and you've simply walked through them with that remarkable certainty of yours. I'm sorry if that's been uncomfortable. Don't apologize for authenticity, he said. Tears too rare to be lamented. They sat in companionable silence, the intensity of their conversation giving way to a shared appreciation of the sanctuary around them. After a while, Daniel checked his watch. We should head back. I have an executive committee meeting at 3. As they walked toward the car, he asked, What about you? What do you want beyond this exploration of potential between us? Professionally? Meredith considered. I've been interested in how technology can address social challenges, healthcare access, educational inequality, environmental sustainability. Apex has resources that could make significant impacts in those areas. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. We have a foundation that funds some initiatives along those lines, but it's more of an afterthought than a strategic priority. Catherine was always pushing for more integration between our profit centers and social impact work. She sounds wise, Meredith said. She was. The words held sadness, but not the sharp edge of fresh grief, progress of a sort. That evening, rather than retreating to his study as usual, Daniel invited Meredith to join him for dinner in the main house. Mrs. Ellison, trying to hide her surprise and approval, prepared a meal in the kitchen that had rarely seen actual cooking since Catherine's passing. Nothing elaborate, Daniel cautioned. This isn't a date. Of course not, Meredith agreed, though her careful attention to her appearance suggested she didn't entirely believe him. She had changed into a simple dress in a deep blue that complemented her eyes and left her hair loose around her shoulders, elegant without being overdressed. When she entered the dining room, she found Daniel waiting with a bottle of wine already open to breathe. He had changed from his casual daytime clothes into a crisp shirt and dark trousers, similarly making an effort while maintaining the pretense that this was merely a convenient arrangement. Mrs. Ellison mentioned you've made significant progress in the library, he said, as they sat across from each other at the long table. She seems impressed by your organizational skills. It's been interesting work, Meredith replied. Your collection tells a story, not just about Apex, but about your interests beyond the company. I noticed quite a few books on architectural theory and sustainable design. Catherine's influence, he admitted. She believed that physical spaces shape human experience, that environments can heal or harm depending on how thoughtfully they're created. Is that why you built the garden sanctuary? He nodded, swirling the wine in his glass. After she was gone, I needed a place that embodied her philosophy, somewhere that could, not replace her, but perhaps channel what she might have contributed if she were still here. It's a beautiful tribute, Meredith said softly. Mrs. Ellison served a simple but perfectly executed meal. Roasted chicken, fresh vegetables from local farms, and crusty bread still warm from the oven. As they ate, the conversation flowed more naturally than either might have expected, touching on books, technologies, places they'd both visited, and ideas that intrigued them. You mentioned social impact earlier, Daniel said as they finished the main course. What specific areas interest you most? Meredith described her vision for technology that could bring medical expertise to underserved communities, educational platforms that adapted to different learning styles, and sustainable infrastructure solutions for developing regions. As she spoke, her face animated with genuine passion, Daniel found himself drawn to her intelligence and conviction. You've clearly thought about these issues deeply, he observed. Most people your age are focused on climbing corporate ladders or accumulating credentials. I've had enough of credentials, she replied with a small smile. I'm more interested in application, taking what I've learned and using it to create meaningful change. There might be opportunities within Apex's foundation, Daniel said, surprising himself with the suggestion. Not because of whatever this is between us, but because your ideas have merit. I'd welcome the chance to contribute, Meredith responded, careful not to appear too eager, but only if it makes sense for the organization. As the evening progressed, They moved from the dining room to the terrace overlooking the gardens, continuing their conversation under the stars. Daniel found himself speaking more openly than he had in years, sharing stories about Apex's early days, challenges he'd faced, and occasionally, memories of Catherine. "She would have liked you," he said unexpectedly, as the evening drew to a close. "Your determination, your clarity of purpose, she valued those qualities." Meredith touched his hand lightly. "Thank you for sharing her with me, even in these small ways. I know that can't be easy." He didn't pull away from the contact. "It's been less difficult than I anticipated. Perhaps Mrs. Ellison is right. Healing follows no schedule." Before they parted for the night, Daniel asked a question that had been on his mind throughout the evening. "After organizing my library and touring, the company after our conversations today, is the reality of me still what you imagined all these years?" Meredith considered her answer carefully. "No," she said honestly. "You're more complex, more human than the figure I constructed. There's a depth to you that articles and annual reports could never capture." She smiled. "The reality is better than the fantasy, even with its complications." "Even with my damage?" he asked, the vulnerability in his voice revealing how much her answer mattered. "Especially with your capacity to heal from damage," she replied. "That's where true strength lies." As she turned to leave, Daniel called after her. "Tomorrow night, there's a charity gala for the Children's Hospital. Catherine was on their board. I usually send a donation but avoid attending. This year, I thought perhaps, would you accompany me?" The invitation hung between them, weighted with significance beyond a simple social engagement. It represented Daniel's first public appearance with a woman since Catherine's passing, his first step toward whatever might be possible between them. "I'd be honored," Meredith said simply, understanding all that remained unspoken. She returned to the guest house with measured steps, careful not to reveal the excitement bubbling within her. The day had shifted something fundamental between them, not yet a declaration or a promise, but an opening, a willingness to explore possibilities previously walled off. In the main house, Daniel poured himself a small measure of whiskey and stood by the windows, watching the lights in the guest house. For the first time in years, the silence of his home didn't feel like a shelter, but like an absence waiting to be filled. The Children's Hospital Gala was held at the Four Seasons Hotel in San Francisco, a glittering affair that brought together Silicon Valley's elite to raise funds for pediatric medical research. For Meredith, the invitation created a practical dilemma she hadn't anticipated. Her carefully packed suitcase contained nothing suitable for such an occasion. "Mrs. Ellison," she confessed that morning, "I have a situation. Mr. Hayes has invited me to attend the Children's Hospital Gala tonight, but I don't have anything appropriate to wear." The housekeeper's eyes widened with interest. "The gala. He hasn't attended that event since." She caught herself. "Well, this is significant. Let me make a call." An hour later, a stylist arrived at the guest house with a selection of designer dresses, accompanied by a hair and makeup artist. "Mr. Hayes arranged everything," the woman explained, unzipping garment bags to reveal evening gowns in various styles and colors. "He said to ensure you had options that would make you feel comfortable and confident." Meredith was touched by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. After trying several options, she selected an elegant emerald green gown with a simple silhouette that highlighted her slender frame without being ostentatious. The color brought out the gold flecks in her eyes and complemented her auburn hair, which the stylist arranged in a sophisticated updo. When she emerged from the guest house that evening, Daniel was waiting beside his car. His expression changed subtly as he took in her appearance, a moment of genuine appreciation that he quickly masked behind his usual composure. "You look," he paused, searching for an appropriate word, "remarkable." "Thank you," she replied, noting that his tuxedo transformed his everyday authority into something more refined and classical. "You clean up rather well yourself." The drive to San Francisco gave Meredith time to prepare mentally for what the evening would entail. This wasn't just any social function, it was an event deeply connected to Catherine's memory, attended by people who had known her and who would inevitably have opinions about Daniel appearing with another woman. "People will talk," she said as they neared the city. "Are you prepared for that?" Daniel kept his eyes on the road. "I've been the subject of speculation since Apex went public. I've learned to ignore most of it." "This is different," Meredith persisted gently. "This is personal. Catherine's colleagues and friends will be there. They might see my presence as disrespectful to her memory." His hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "Catherine never wanted me to stop living if something happened to her. We had that conversation once, not expecting it would ever be relevant, just one of those late-night what-ifs. She made me promise not to become a hermit." A sad smile touched his lips. "She said I'd be terrible at hermitage, too much nervous energy." Meredith absorbed this revelation with a mixture of sadness and gratitude. Sadness for the love that had been cut short. Gratitude that Daniel was sharing these intimate memories with her. "Still," she said, "if it becomes uncomfortable for you, we can leave early." "I won't be offended." He glanced at her. "Always practical, even in a designer gown." "Especially in a designer gown," she replied lightly. "It's borrowed, after all." The hotel ballroom was transformed for the occasion, with crystal chandeliers casting a warm glow over elegantly decorated tables. As Daniel and Meredith entered, a subtle but noticeable hush fell over the nearest conversations, followed by a buzz of whispered speculation. Daniel guided her through the crowd with a protective hand at the small of her back, nodding at acquaintances, but not stopping to chat. "Daniel Hayes," a warm voice called. They turned to find an older gentleman approaching, his smile genuine beneath silver hair. "It's been too long, my friend." "Dr. Whitman." Daniel clasped the man's hand. "Good to see you. How's the pediatric cardiology department?" "Thriving, thanks in no small part to your foundation's support." The doctor's kind eyes shifted to Meredith. "And who is this lovely young lady?" "Meredith Campbell," Daniel introduced her. "Meredith, this is Dr. Thomas Whitman, Chief of Pediatric Surgery and a dear friend of Catherine's." If Dr. Whitman was surprised by Daniel's companion, he hid it well. "A pleasure, Miss Campbell. Any friend of Daniel's is welcome here. Catherine always said he needed more people in his life who weren't obsessed with profit margins." "She wasn't wrong about that," Daniel acknowledged. Dr. Whitman was the first of many introductions as they made their way through the ballroom. Most of Catherine's former colleagues greeted Meredith with polite curiosity, though she couldn't miss the speculative glances that followed them. Daniel handled the situation with practiced ease, never explaining Meredith's presence, but treating her with a respect that discouraged inappropriate questions. During dinner, they were seated at a table with hospital board members and major donors. The conversation flowed smoothly, focusing primarily on the hospital's achievements and future plans. Meredith spoke when addressed, but otherwise maintained a dignified presence beside Daniel, neither trying to assert herself as his equal, nor shrinking into the background. "You navigate these waters well," Daniel murmured to her during a lull in the table conversation. "Not too eager, not too reserved. I attended enough school functions at Westridge to learn the fundamentals of high society dynamics," she replied quietly. "It's all about finding the right balance." As the formal dinner concluded and the band began playing, opening the floor for dancing, Daniel surprised her by extending his hand. "Would you care to dance, Miss Campbell?" The invitation drew subtle attention from nearby tables. Daniel Hayes, who had attended few social functions since his loss and had never been seen with another woman, was now asking someone to dance. Meredith placed her hand in his. "I'd love to." On the dance floor, his hand settled at her waist with proper distance, his movements confident without being showy. They moved together with a natural coordination that belied their brief acquaintance. "You dance well," she observed. "Catherine insisted I learn properly before our wedding," he explained. Said she refused to be led around the floor by a man who treated dancing like a business negotiation. Meredith smiled at the image. She was wise about many things. As they continued dancing, Meredith became aware of a man watching them intently from the edge of the floor, tall, distinguished, with a calculating gaze that seemed to assess rather than admire. "Who's that?" she asked discreetly. Daniel followed her gaze and his expression hardened. "Richard Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Technologies. our chief competitor in the medical devices division. Also a hospital donor, though I suspect more for the networking opportunities than actual philanthropy. He seems very interested in us. In you, Daniel corrected. Blackwood considers himself a corporate intelligence expert. He's trying to figure out who you are and whether your presence here tonight has business implications. Before Meredith could respond, the song ended and another couple approached them, an elegantly dressed woman in her 50s, accompanied by a younger man who bore a striking resemblance to her. Daniel, the woman greeted him warmly, kissing his cheek. It's so good to see you here. Catherine would be pleased. Margaret, Daniel's voice softened. You look well. How's Michael? Still teaching at Berkeley, still refusing to get a proper haircut, she replied with maternal exasperation, then turned curious eyes to Meredith. And who is this? Meredith Campbell, Daniel introduced her. Meredith, this is Margaret Bennett, Catherine's mother and her brother James. Meredith felt a moment of genuine anxiety. Meeting the mother of the woman whose absence still shaped Daniel's life was more intimidating than facing any business tycoon or society matron. Mrs. Bennett, she said softly, it's an honor to meet you. Margaret studied her with intelligent eyes, so similar to those in Catherine's photograph that Meredith felt a chill of recognition. After a moment, the older woman's expression warmed. The honor is mine, my dear. Daniel rarely attends these functions, and never with company. You must be quite special. We're still discovering that, Daniel replied with careful neutrality. James Bennett, who had been watching the exchange with brotherly protectiveness, stepped forward. Since we're interrupting your dancing anyway, mind if I steal my mother for a moment, Daniel? The hospital administrator wants to discuss next year's fundraising calendar with her. Of course, Daniel agreed, relief evident in his tone. Family interactions, even with Catherine's family, whom he clearly respected, remained challenging territory. As Margaret and James moved away, Daniel guided Meredith toward the terrace doors. Some air might be welcome, he suggested, clearly needing a break from the social intensity of the ballroom. The terrace overlooked the city lights, the evening fog rolling in to soften the urban landscape. A few other guests lingered in quiet conversation, but a corner near the stone balustrade offered relative privacy. You handled that well, Daniel said once they were alone. Meeting Catherine's mother couldn't have been easy. She seems like a remarkable woman, Meredith replied honestly. I can see where Catherine got her directness and warmth. Daniel nodded. Margaret has been incredibly understanding these past years, never pushing, never judging my withdrawal, but always leaving the door open. The whole Bennett family has been kinder than I probably deserved. You were family to them, Meredith observed. Loss doesn't change that. Before he could respond, a new voice interrupted their moment of connection. Daniel Hayes, emerging from hibernation at last. Richard Blackwood approached with calculated casualness, crystal tumbler in hand, and with such charming company. The rumors clearly didn't do justice to reality. Daniel's posture stiffened, but his voice remained even. Richard, I wasn't aware you were on the donor list this year. Oh, I never miss an opportunity to support such worthy causes, Blackwood replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Especially when they provide such excellent networking opportunities. Won't you introduce me to your lovely companion? Meredith Campbell, Daniel said briefly. Meredith Richard Blackwood of Blackwood Technologies. Blackwood took her hand, holding it slightly longer than necessary. Enchanted, Miss Campbell. I must say you've accomplished what many thought impossible, bringing the reclusive Mr. Hayes back into society. One wonders what special qualities could achieve such a miracle. The insinuation in his tone was unmistakable. Meredith withdrew her hand politely but firmly. Mr. Hayes makes his own decisions, Mr. Blackwood. I'm merely fortunate to benefit from his company this evening. Indeed. Blackwood's gaze shifted between them, assessing. It's interesting timing, with the medical division contracts up for renewal next quarter. A fresh face at Apex could signal new directions. Daniel's expression remained impassive, but Meredith could sense his increasing tension. Meredith's presence has nothing to do with business, Richard. Though I understand why someone who views all relationships as tactical advantages might think so. Blackwood laughed, a sound without humor. Come now, Daniel. We're all players in the same game. Miss Campbell here is what, 25. 26. With her youth and obvious charm, combined with your resources and industry position, it's a natural alliance. I'm 21, Mr. Blackwood, Meredith corrected calmly, and while I'm flattered by your assumption that I have strategic value to Apex Innovations, I assure you my presence here tonight is purely social. 21? Blackwood raised an eyebrow, glancing at Daniel with new calculation. How progressive of you, Hayes, though perhaps not surprising. Men who have experienced profound loss often seek emotional inheritance from much younger partners, a way to transfer their pain without the messy business of processing it themselves. Daniel took a step forward, his composure cracking for the first time that evening. That's enough, Richard. Just an observation from someone who's seen similar patterns, Blackwood continued, seemingly enjoying Daniel's reaction. Young women are remarkably adept at positioning themselves as emotional saviors for successful men in midlife transitions. The combination of youth, attention, and apparent understanding is quite irresistible. Meredith placed a restraining hand on Daniel's arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. Mr. Blackwood, she said with deliberate clarity, your insights into human psychology are fascinating if somewhat reductive. But since this is a charity event rather than a therapy session, perhaps we could focus on the actual purpose of the evening, supporting children's health care. Blackwood's smugness faltered momentarily at her composed response. Of course, always good to remember why we're here. He raised his glass in a mock toast. To new beginnings and strategic alignments, whatever form they may take. As he walked away, Daniel released a controlled breath. I apologize for that. Richard has always been competitive, but that was beyond his usual tactics. He was deliberately trying to provoke you, Meredith observed, and plant doubts about me. Daniel nodded grimly. Standard psychological warfare. He's up against Apex for a major hospital system contract. Destabilizing me emotionally would be tactically advantageous. And did he succeed? Meredith asked directly. In planting doubts, Daniel studied her face in the soft terrace lighting. Let's go back inside. I believe they're about to announce the donation totals. His non-answer hung between them as they returned to the ballroom, where the remainder of the evening passed in a blur of speeches, applause and carefully maintained social smiles. Daniel wrote a substantial check during the live auction portion of the fundraising. But his earlier warmth had been replaced by a distracted formality that Meredith felt acutely. The drive back to Palo Alto was silent, the comfortable rapport they had been building now strained by Blackwood's insinuations. As they approached the estate gates, Daniel finally spoke. Blackwood is a manipulative bastard, but he's not entirely wrong. Meredith turned to look at him. About what? About the risks of whatever this is developing between us. Daniel's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. I'm 22 years older than you, Meredith. I've built and lost a life you're just beginning to construct. There's an inherent imbalance that can't be ignored, regardless of your intelligence or maturity. So you are having doubts, she said quietly. Daniel pulled into the circular driveway and stopped the car, turning to face her fully. I'm questioning my judgment. Is my interest in you genuine, or is it a response to years of isolation? Are you seeing me clearly, or a projection created from childhood impressions and media narratives? Those are fair questions, Meredith acknowledged. But they're questions to explore, not reasons to retreat. Perhaps. He got out and came around to open her door. As they walked toward the main house, he continued, I have an early meeting in Singapore tomorrow, a video conference that will likely take most of the day. We should talk further when that's concluded. The formality in his tone was unmistakable, a step back from the connection they had been building. Meredith nodded, refusing to show how deeply his withdrawal affected her. Of course, thank you for including me this evening. It was an illuminating experience. At the guest house door, Daniel hesitated, then simply said, Good night, Meredith, before walking away, his posture rigid with unresolved tension. Inside, Meredith carefully hung the borrowed gown and removed the elegant hairpins, her movements mechanical as she processed the evening's emotional whiplash. They had been dancing toward something meaningful, only to have doubt skillfully inserted into the equation by a man who viewed relationships as tactical maneuvers. She slept fitfully, waking early to the sound of Daniel's car leaving the property, presumably for his office and the Singapore conference. After a quiet breakfast, she returned to the library, hoping that the familiar task of organizing his papers might restore some of the connection that had begun to form between them. Mid-morning, as she sorted through a box of old project proposals, Mrs. Ellison appeared with coffee and a concerned expression. "You're both stubborn, you know," the housekeeper observed, setting down the tray. "Him with his walls, you with your certainty. It makes for a challenging dynamic." Meredith smiled weakly. "You noticed the change after the gala?" "Hard to miss," Mrs. Ellison replied dryly. "He was in his study until 3 in the morning, reviewing old contracts. Always retreats to work when emotions become complicated." She poured coffee for them both. "Something happened at that event. Care to share?" Meredith explained the encounter with Blackwood and the doubts it had raised in Daniel. Mrs. Ellison listened with the careful attention of someone who had witnessed many chapters of her employer's life. "Richard, Blackwood has been trying to undermine Daniel for years," the housekeeper said when Meredith finished. "But he succeeded this time because he targeted vulnerabilities that were already there. Daniel has been questioning himself since you arrived, wondering if his interest in you is appropriate, whether he's betraying Catherine's memory, if the age difference matters." "I understand his concerns," Meredith said. "They're valid questions." Mrs. Ellison studied her over the rim of her coffee cup. "The question is, are you prepared for how he might answer them?" Before Meredith could respond, the doorbell rang, an unusual occurrence at the secluded estate. Mrs. Ellison excused herself to answer it, returning moments later with an envelope. "A courier just delivered this," she said, handing it to Meredith. "From Mr. Hayes's office." With a sense of foreboding, Meredith opened the envelope to find a brief note written in Daniel's precise handwriting. "Meredith, I've arranged for a car to bring you to Apex headquarters at 2 p.m. There are matters we should discuss in person. Daniel." The formal tone and business setting suggested that whatever decision he had reached overnight, it wasn't the one she had hoped for. With trembling hands, she folded the note and placed it back in its envelope. "Not good news?" Mrs. Ellison asked gently. "I'm not sure," Meredith replied, striving for composure. "But I think I need to prepare myself for disappointment." The Apex Innovations headquarters gleamed in the afternoon sun as the car Daniel had arranged pulled through the security gates. Meredith had dressed with careful consideration, a tailored navy dress that projected confidence without appearing overdressed. Her hair styled simply, her only jewelry a pair of small pearl earrings that had been her grandmother's. Mark Wilson, Daniel's chief of staff, was waiting in the lobby. "Miss Campbell, welcome back to Apex. Mr. Hayes asked me to bring you up right away." The elevator ride to the executive floor was silent, Mark clearly uncomfortable with whatever situation he had been drawn into. When they reached Daniel's office, he merely opened the door and nodded for her to enter, quickly retreating once she had done so. Daniel stood at the windows, his back to the door, gazing out at the campus he had built. He didn't turn immediately when she entered, and in that moment of suspended animation, Meredith felt her heart constrict with the certainty that something had fundamentally changed. "Thank you for coming," he said finally, turning to face her. His expression was carefully controlled, his posture formal. He gestured to the sitting area. "Please have a seat." Meredith complied, arranging herself on the sofa with outward calm that belied her inner turmoil. Daniel remained standing, maintaining both physical and emotional distance. "I've been reviewing some reports this morning," he began, his tone businesslike, "including one from Dr. Chen's research team on a new neural interface technology. It reminded me of something you mentioned about using technology to bring medical expertise to underserved areas." The professional direction of the conversation confirmed Meredith's fears, but she maintained her composure. "It's an area with significant potential for positive impact." "Indeed." He paced slightly, hands clasped behind his back. "Our foundation has been somewhat unfocused in its grant-making. Catherine had plans to develop more strategic initiatives, particularly in healthcare access, but after she was gone," he paused, "I let it continue on autopilot." "That's understandable," Meredith said softly. "You had other priorities." Daniel stopped pacing and finally looked directly at her. "Meredith, I think it would be beneficial for both of us to establish some professional distance. Your ideas about technology for social impact align with directions Apex should be exploring. I've discussed with the foundation, board the possibility of creating a fellowship position, a role that would allow you to develop those concepts with institutional support. The careful wording couldn't mask the truth. He was offering her a professional opportunity as a substitute for personal connection, a way to honor her ideas while severing the emotional possibilities that had begun to develop between them. "I see," she said, her voice steady despite the disappointment flooding through her. "And this fellowship would be based here at headquarters?" "Initially, yes, though there would likely be fieldwork involved, assessing needs in target communities, piloting technologies." He returned to the desk, putting even more space between them. "The position comes with a competitive stipend and housing allowance. You wouldn't need to continue staying at the guest house." There it was, the complete withdrawal, wrapped in the trappings of professional consideration. "May I ask what changed?" Meredith inquired, refusing to simply accept the redirection without understanding. Yesterday, before Blackwood's intervention, things seemed to be progressing in a different direction. Daniel sighed, sitting behind his desk, a position of authority and control. "Nothing changed, Meredith. I simply had time to reflect more carefully on the situation." Blackwood's crude observations contained a kernel of truth that I'd been avoiding. "There are significant challenges to any personal relationship between us: age differences, power imbalances, my own unresolved grief. It would be irresponsible to continue down that path." "So you've unilaterally decided what's best for both of us," Meredith observed, a hint of anger finally breaking through her composed exterior. "Without discussing it with me, without considering that I might have thought through these same issues and reached different conclusions. I'm trying to do the right thing," he replied, frustration edging his voice. "For both of us." Meredith stood, smoothing her dress with deliberate calm. "No, Daniel. You're doing the safe thing. There's a difference." His expression tightened. "Perhaps safety is warranted when the alternatives involve significant risk to people's well-being." "Life involves risk," she countered. "Every meaningful connection, every important decision carries the possibility of pain alongside joy. Avoiding risk doesn't prevent suffering. It just guarantees emptiness." "That's a very young perspective," Daniel said, the words tinged with condescension. "When you've experienced more loss—" "Don't," Meredith cut him off, her voice sharp. "Don't use your pain as a shield against vulnerability. It dishonors what you had with Catherine and prevents you from having anything authentic again." The directness of her challenge left him momentarily speechless. She used the opportunity to move toward the door but paused before leaving. "I appreciate the fellowship offer," she said, composure restored. "It's generous and thoughtful. But I can't accept it under these circumstances, not as a consolation prize for a connection you're too afraid to explore." She reached into her purse and withdrew an envelope. "I wrote this last night after we returned from the gala. I wasn't sure if I would give it to you, but now it seems necessary." She placed the envelope on his desk. "Whatever you decide, Daniel, I wish you well. Truly." With that, she walked out, closing the door quietly behind her. In the elevator, she finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of disappointment, a single tear escaping before she brushed it away. By the time she reached the lobby, her composure was restored, shoulders back, head high, the dignity she had cultivated at Westridge serving her well in this moment of rejection. Outside, rather than calling for a car, Meredith began walking. She had no destination in mind, simply needing movement to process her emotions. The Silicon Valley afternoon was mild, perfect for walking, and the physical exertion helped clear her mind. After nearly an hour, she found herself at a small park near the Palo Alto train station. Sitting on a bench beneath a flowering magnolia tree, she considered her options. She could return to Stanford, resume her studies, and chalk this up as a youthful adventure, the pursuit of a childhood dream that had proven more complicated in reality than in fantasy. Or she could stay, find temporary accommodation, and give Daniel time to reconsider. The thought felt like clinging to false hope, a position of weakness rather than strength. She had made her case. Continuing to push would only diminish them both. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, Meredith made her decision. She would return to the estate, pack her things, and leave Daniel a note thanking him for his hospitality. Then she would check into a hotel for the night and take the train back to San Francisco in the morning. The clean break would allow them both to move forward with dignity. She was arranging for a taxi when her phone rang, Mrs. Ellison's number appearing on the screen. "Hello?" Meredith answered, curious about the timing of the call. "Miss Campbell." The housekeeper's voice held an unusual tension. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Not at all. I was just making arrangements to return to the house and collect my things." There was a brief hesitation on the other end of the line. "That's actually why I'm calling. Mr. Hayes returned about an hour ago. He went straight to his study and hasn't emerged since. He doesn't appear to be well." Concern immediately overrode Meredith's personal disappointment. "What do you mean, not well?" "He's never been one to show emotion openly," Mrs. Ellison explained, "but I've worked for him long enough to recognize when something is deeply wrong. He's not responding to messages, cancelled his afternoon meetings, and I heard what sounded like glass breaking earlier. Have you checked on him?" Meredith asked, already signaling for a passing taxi. "I tried." He asked to be left alone, rather forcefully. The worry in Mrs. Ellison's voice was palpable. "I wouldn't normally involve anyone else in a private matter, but given the circumstances, I thought perhaps you might help." Meredith hesitated only briefly. Whatever had happened between them professionally, she couldn't ignore Daniel's distress. "I'll be there as soon as possible." The taxi ride to the estate seemed interminable, though in reality it took less than 20 minutes. Mrs. Ellison was waiting at the front door, her usually composed features drawn with concern. "He's still in the study," she reported as Meredith entered. "The letter you left, he read it several times, then made some calls, cancelled everything, and has been in there ever since." Meredith nodded, a mixture of hope and apprehension rising within her. "Let me try to speak with him." She approached the study door and knocked gently. "Daniel, it's Meredith. May I come in?" Silence greeted her, then a muffled, "Not now." "I'm concerned about you," she persisted. "Mrs. Ellison called me. Whatever's happening, I'd like to help if I can." More silence, long enough that she began to think he wouldn't respond at all. Finally, the door opened to reveal Daniel looking distinctly un-CEO-like. Tie loosened, hair disheveled, eyes reddened in a way that suggested either lack of sleep or suppressed emotion. "You shouldn't be here," he said, but stepped aside to let her enter nonetheless. The study was in unusual disarray. Papers were scattered across the desk. A crystal tumbler lay shattered on the floor near the fireplace, and Catherine's photograph, normally kept in the library, sat prominently on the desk. "What happened?" Meredith asked quietly. Daniel closed the door and leaned against it, as if needing the support. "I read your letter." His voice was rough with emotion. 7 times. Actually. Meredith glanced at the envelope on his desk, now opened, its contents apparently having had a significant impact. "And then I realized something," he continued, moving to stand by the windows. "I've been hiding. Not just from you, or from the possibilities between us, but from life itself. Using Catherine's memory not as comfort, but as shelter against further pain." He turned to face her, vulnerability evident in his usually controlled features. "Your letter called me out on that, gently but unequivocally. No one has been that honest with me since Catherine died. Everyone else walks on eggshells, afraid to push me beyond what they perceive as my emotional limits." "What did you do after you read it?" Meredith asked, noting the broken glass. A rueful expression crossed his face. "I called Richard Blackwood and told him exactly what I thought of his tactics at the gala. Then I cancelled my meetings to think. And then he gestured toward the fireplace, lost my temper with myself. For being a coward, for pushing away something meaningful, because it didn't fit my carefully controlled narrative." Meredith took a tentative step closer. "And what conclusions did you reach during all this thinking?" "That I've been unfair to you," he said directly. "You came here with courage and clarity, offering genuine connection without demands or agendas. I responded by analyzing potential problems rather than possibilities, by treating an emotional matter like a business risk assessment." He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. "And then I compounded the error by making decisions for both of us, without consultation or consideration for your perspective." "Yes," Meredith agreed simply. "You did." Her candor drew a surprised laugh from him, a sound so unexpected in the tense atmosphere that it seemed to break something open between them. I went looking for you, he admitted. After I realized what I'd done, Mark said you left the building immediately after our meeting. I checked the guest house, then had security review the campus footage to see which direction you went, but you'd already gone beyond our camera range. I needed to walk, she explained, to clear my head and decide what to do next. And what did you decide? He asked, the question carrying weight beyond its simple phrasing. Meredith considered how much to reveal. I decided to leave, she said honestly, to thank you for your hospitality and return to San Francisco, to give you space and myself dignity. Daniel nodded slowly, accepting this, a reasonable decision given my behavior. He moved toward her, closing some of the distance between them. But I'm asking you to reconsider, not because I have answers to all the questions between us, but because I'm finally willing to explore them honestly, without predetermined conclusions or protective withdrawal. The vulnerability in his eyes, the sincerity in his voice touched something deep within her. This wasn't the polished CEO or the guarded widower, but simply Daniel, a man acknowledging his fears and limitations while reaching beyond them. What changed? She asked, needing to understand before making any decision. Your letter, he replied. Particularly the part where you wrote about not wanting to replace Catherine or erase my past, but to honor it by helping me build something new, about understanding that real love isn't threatened by memory, but enriched by it. He paused. No one has framed it that way before, as permission rather than pressure, as continuation rather than replacement. Meredith remembered the words she had written late at night, trying to capture her feelings with both honesty and respect. I meant every word. I know, he said softly. That's what finally got through to me. Your sincerity has been constant from the beginning, from that first declaration in the lobby 11 years ago to the letter you left today. While I've been inconsistent, retreating whenever connection felt too risky. He closed the remaining distance between them, taking her hands in his, the first deliberate physical contact he had initiated. I can't promise immediate transformation. I've spent years building these walls, and dismantling them will take time. But I'm asking for the chance to try, not as a business arrangement or a carefully managed relationship, but as a genuine exploration of what might be possible between us. Meredith looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of hesitation or insincerity. Finding none, she made her decision. I'm not asking for promises, Daniel. Just honesty and effort. The rest we can figure out together. Relief visibly washed over him, tension releasing from his shoulders. Thank you, he said simply, for your persistence, your clarity, and your willingness to give me another chance. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Mrs. Ellison's voice called through, Mr. Hayes, is everything all right? Daniel smiled slightly. You called in reinforcements, he observed to Meredith, then raised his voice. Everything's fine, Mrs. Ellison. Better than fine, actually. Good, the housekeeper replied, not bothering to hide her approval. Dinner will be ready at 7 if you're both interested. As her footsteps retreated, Daniel and Meredith shared a moment of quiet amusement at the housekeeper's transparent matchmaking. She's been on your side from the beginning, Daniel noted. Probably saw potential that I was too stubborn to acknowledge. She loves you, Meredith said simply. Wants you to be happy. As did Catherine, I imagine. Daniel's expression softened at the mention of his late wife. He glanced at her photograph on the desk. She would have liked you, he repeated his observation from days earlier, but this time without the defensive edge. Your determination reminds me of her. She never let me retreat into work when something personal needed addressing. High praise, Meredith said softly. I would have liked to know her. I'll tell you about her, Daniel promised. The real Catherine, not just the perfect memory I've preserved. Her stubborn moments, her quirky habits, the way she would sing off-key in the shower and deny it completely. His voice held warmth rather than pain. If we're going to build something honest between us, it needs to include all parts of our lives, including the people who shaped us. The offer represented more than just stories. It was an invitation to know him completely, past and present. Meredith recognized the significance and responded in kind. And I'll tell you about the girl who made that impulsive declaration 11 years ago, about the mockery she endured at school for her certainty, about the doubts that occasionally crept in during lonely nights, about the young woman who almost gave up several times, but found renewed conviction in unexpected moments. Daniel squeezed her hands gently. "I'd like that very much." They stood together in the fading afternoon light, neither rushing to define what would come next, both understanding that they had crossed a threshold from possibility into commitment, not to specific outcomes, but to honest exploration of whatever might develop between them. Outside the study windows, the estate gardens glowed in the golden hour, shadows lengthening across manicured lawns that had witnessed both joy and sorrow. Within those walls, two people who had found each other through an unlikely confluence of childhood certainty, adult loss, and persistent hope stood at the beginning of a new chapter, one they would write together, word by careful word, day by deliberate day. The transition from possibility to reality is rarely smooth, and the weeks following Daniel and Meredith's reconciliation in his study proved no exception. They moved forward with careful steps, both acutely aware of the scrutiny their relationship would face once made public. Meredith returned to Stanford to complete her academic obligations, arranging to finish her degree requirements while working part-time with the Apex Innovations Foundation, a position Daniel offered not as consolation but as recognition of her genuine talents and interests. She moved into an apartment in Palo Alto, establishing her independence while remaining close enough for their relationship to develop organically. "I need to stand on my own," she explained, when Daniel suggested she continue staying at the guest house. "If this is going to work between us, I can't be perceived as dependent on you by others or by myself." He respected her decision, recognizing the wisdom in maintaining appropriate boundaries as they navigated the early stages of their relationship. They established a rhythm of dinners together several times a week, weekend outings to museums or parks, and occasional workday lunches when their schedules aligned. Daniel, true to his word, began dismantling the emotional walls he had constructed. It wasn't always elegant. Years of practiced detachment didn't dissolve overnight. There were moments when he withdrew into work habits or reflexively changed the subject, when conversations touched on painful memories. But unlike before, he now recognized these patterns and worked to correct them, often circling back to address topics he had initially avoided. "Catherine used to call me out when I did that," he confessed one evening, as they walked through a sculpture garden after he had abruptly redirected a conversation about family. "The conversational dodge," she'd say. "I see you hiding behind that CEO face, Daniel Hayes. Come back and be real with me." Meredith smiled at the insight into their relationship. "She sounds wonderfully direct." She was, Daniel agreed, now able to speak of Catherine with fondness rather than protective reverence. "It's strange. The more honestly I remember her with all her human complexities, the more I can be present with you. It's as if preserving her as this perfect saintly figure was actually dishonoring the real woman she was." "Memory works best when it breathes," Meredith observed, "when we allow it to evolve and integrate into our present, rather than keeping it sealed away." 6 weeks into their new beginning, Daniel faced his first significant public test. The annual Apex Innovations shareholders meeting required his presence in New York, and he invited Meredith to accompany him, a step that would inevitably announce their relationship to the business world and, by extension, the media. "Are you certain?" she asked as they discussed the logistics. "Once we appear together at a corporate event, there will be questions, speculation, articles analyzing every aspect of our connection." Daniel considered this seriously. "I've spent too long making decisions based on fear of scrutiny or discomfort. Yes, there will be talk, some of it unkind, some of it intrusive. But hiding what matters to me isn't the solution." The New York trip unfolded much as they had anticipated. Business reporters noted Meredith's presence at Daniel's side during a pre-meeting reception, and by the following morning, technology blogs and financial news sites were running stories with headlines like "Hayes emerges from seclusion with Stanford protege and Apex CEOs. May-December romance raises eyebrows. Richard Blackwood, never one to miss an opportunity for disruption, gave a particularly pointed interview to a prominent business publication. "While I wish Daniel every happiness," he said with manufactured sincerity, "one has to question the judgment of a CEO who brings a woman half his age into both his personal life and corporate foundation simultaneously. Shareholders might reasonably wonder where professional mentorship ends and personal Entanglement begins. Daniel read the quote over breakfast, in their hotel suite, and laughed, a reaction that surprised Meredith. "You find that funny?" she asked, peering at the article. "I find it predictable," Daniel replied, "and ultimately irrelevant. Blackwood is trying to create a narrative that serves his competitive interests. Our job isn't to fight that narrative directly, but to live our truth consistently enough that it becomes self-evident." His equanimity in the face of public scrutiny reassured Meredith. The Daniel she had first encountered at Apex headquarters months earlier would have retreated behind corporate walls, probably ending their relationship rather than weathering the public commentary. This evolution, his willingness to stand firmly in his choices despite discomfort, represented genuine growth. Upon their return to California, they found an unexpected visitor waiting at Daniel's estate. Margaret Bennett, Catherine's mother, had arrived unannounced and was calmly having tea with Mrs. Ellison when they pulled into the driveway. "Margaret," Daniel greeted her with genuine warmth but obvious surprise, "this is unexpected." The elegant older woman set down her teacup. When one's son-in-law appears in the financial press with a significant new relationship, her mother might be forgiven for seeking first-hand information rather than relying on journalistic speculation. Her gaze shifted to Meredith. "Miss Campbell, we met briefly at the hospital gala." "Mrs. Bennett," Meredith replied, maintaining composure despite her internal nervousness. "It's good to see you again." Mrs. Ellison, sensing the need for a private conversation, excused herself to prepare lunch, leaving the three of them alone in the sunlit living room that had once been Catherine's domain. "So," Margaret said directly, "I'd like to understand what's happening here from both of you. Not as an interrogation, but as someone who cares deeply about Daniel's well-being and who maintains a vested interest in how my daughter's memory is honored." The conversation that followed was both difficult and healing. Daniel explained how he had first met Meredith, the years that had passed, and the recent reconnection that had gradually evolved from curiosity into genuine attachment. Meredith shared her perspective with honesty and respect, acknowledging the unusual origins of their connection while emphasizing the authentic relationship that had developed between them as adults. Margaret listened attentively, occasionally asking pointed questions that revealed her sharp intelligence and protective instincts. When they finished speaking, she was quiet for several moments, considering all she had heard. "Catherine always worried that you would isolate yourself if anything happened to her," she finally said to Daniel. "Even before she became ill during the pregnancy, she extracted promises from me to keep inviting you to family gatherings, to maintain connection despite what she called your tendency toward emotional hibernation." Daniel nodded, his expression soft with memory. "She knew me well." "She did," Margaret agreed, "which is why I believe she would approve of what I'm seeing between you two. Not because Meredith is replacing her, no one could or should, but because she's clearly encouraging you to live fully again." She turned to Meredith. "My daughter valued authenticity above almost everything else. She would appreciate your directness and your unwillingness to let Daniel hide behind grief or work." The approval delivered with such thoughtful consideration moved Meredith deeply. "Thank you," she said simply. "That means a great deal." Margaret stayed for lunch, and by the time she departed that afternoon, a bridge had been established. Not just between her and Meredith, but between the past Daniel had honored and the future he was beginning to embrace. As summer turned to fall, Daniel and Meredith settled into a relationship that balanced independence with deepening connection. She completed her Stanford degree and took on a more substantial role at the foundation, developing a telemedicine initiative for rural communities that soon became one of Apex's most praised philanthropic efforts. He continued leading the company, but with a renewed balance between professional ambition and personal fulfillment. In October, nearly 6 months after Meredith had arrived at Apex headquarters to fulfill a childhood promise, Daniel proposed, not in a grand public gesture, but during a quiet moment in the garden sanctuary where they had first begun to truly know each other. "I'm not asking because of a promise made by a 10-year-old girl," he said, holding a simple but elegant ring. "I'm asking because the woman you've become has taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward despite it. Because you've shown me that honoring the past doesn't require sacrificing the future. Because I love you, Meredith Campbell, with a heart that has grown large enough to hold both precious memory and present joy. Yes, she answered without hesitation. Not because of childhood certainty, but because of adult choice. Because you've proven that vulnerability isn't weakness, but the deepest kind of strength. Because I love you, Daniel Hayes, exactly as you are, past, present, and whatever we build together. When news of their engagement became public, reactions were predictably mixed. Business publications speculated about succession planning and corporate governance implications. Gossip columns focused on the age difference and dramatic backstory. Social media erupted with both cynical commentary and romantic approval. Through it all, Daniel and Meredith maintained the steady centeredness that had become the hallmark of their relationship, acknowledging outside perspectives without being defined by them, responding when necessary with grace rather than defensiveness, and focusing primarily on the life they were building together. The wedding plans reflected this philosophy, neither a secretive, private affair that might suggest shame, nor an ostentatious celebration that courted public attention. They chose to marry in the garden of Daniel's estate, now truly their shared home, with a carefully curated guest list that included family, close friends, key Apex employees who had become almost family over the years, and yes, even a few carefully selected business associates. "Are you sure about inviting Blackwood?" Meredith asked, when Daniel suggested including his rival among the corporate guests. "He hasn't exactly been supportive." "Precisely why he should be there," Daniel replied. "I want him to witness what he tried to prevent, not out of petty triumph, but because sometimes seeing happiness firsthand can be more transformative than being excluded from it." The December wedding day dawned clear and crisp. California winter sunshine warming the gardens, where white chairs had been arranged in a semicircle around a simple wooden arch covered in winter blooms. Catherine's family occupied the front row on Daniel's side, a deliberate choice that acknowledged the continuity of family bonds beyond loss. Meredith's parents, who had initially been skeptical of the relationship, but had grown to appreciate Daniel's genuine commitment to their daughter, watched with a mixture of pride and lingering parental concern as she walked down the garden path in an elegant gown of ivory silk. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful, with vows they had written themselves that acknowledged both the unusual beginning of their connection and the thoughtful, deliberate choice they were now making. Margaret Bennett read a passage from Catherine's favorite poem, a gesture that brought tears to Daniel's eyes and deep appreciation to Meredith's heart. During the reception, as guests mingled on the terrace where tables had been set for an elegant lunch, Richard Blackwood approached the couple with a glass of champagne and his characteristic calculating smile. "Quite a triumph. A Miss Campbell, or Mrs. Hayes now, I suppose," he said, the congratulatory words undermined by his tone. Widower successfully consoled, corporate access secured, and all within a remarkably efficient time frame. One almost suspects the childhood meeting was retrospectively embellished for narrative appeal. Before Daniel could respond, Meredith met Blackwood's gaze directly. "Mr. Blackwood, true love doesn't compete with the past, it honors it. And promises kept through years of patience need no defense, especially not on a day meant for celebration rather than corporate maneuvering." The unexpected directness of her response, delivered with quiet dignity rather than defensive anger, visibly disconcerted Blackwood. For once, the corporate shark found himself without a ready counterattack. Daniel, watching this exchange with pride rather than protective intervention, simply added, "We're genuinely pleased you could witness our happiness today, Richard. Sometimes life offers second chances that business strategy can never account for." As Blackwood retreated, momentarily outmaneuvered, Margaret Bennett appeared at Meredith's side. "Catherine would have applauded that handling," she said with approval. "She always believed grace under pressure was the ultimate power move." The celebration continued into early evening, the estate filled with more laughter and music than it had known in years. When the last guests departed, Daniel and Meredith stood on the terrace overlooking the gardens, where their vows had been exchanged, his arm around her waist, her head resting against his shoulder. "When you walked into my lobby 11 years ago," he said softly, "I never imagined we'd end up here." "I did," Meredith replied with a smile. Not the specific details, but the essential truth that we belonged in each other's lives. He kissed her forehead. Your certainty was wiser than my careful calculations, and your caution balanced my impulsiveness, she countered. We each brought what the other needed. The following spring brought news that tested Daniel's healing and confirmed its depth. Meredith was expecting their first child. When the doctor confirmed the pregnancy, Daniel experienced a complex wave of emotions. Joy mingled with echoes of old fear, excitement shadowed by memories of loss. Talk to me, Meredith encouraged, when she saw the conflict in his eyes during the drive home from the appointment. Whatever you're feeling, we face it together. I'm terrified, he admitted, the honesty that had become fundamental to their relationship, allowing him to voice his deepest fear. Not just normal expectant father nerves, but a specific terror born from experience. Part of me wants to wrap you in protective isolation until the baby arrives safely. I understand, she said, placing her hand over his. And it's natural to be afraid after what happened with Catherine, but we can't let fear make our decisions. We'll take every reasonable precaution. Work with the best medical team, but ultimately, we have to live with both hope and uncertainty. Over the following months, Daniel balanced protective concern with deliberate optimism. He attended every medical appointment, researched the latest in prenatal care, and ensured Meredith had both the support she needed and the independence she valued. Together they prepared the nursery, not converting his home office as he once had, but creating an entirely new space that honored the future without erasing the past. One evening, as they reviewed potential names, Daniel grew quiet, a familiar sign that he was processing something difficult. What is it? Meredith asked gently. If it's a boy, he said hesitantly, would you consider using Catherine's father's name as a middle name? Edward was a good man. He passed before you and I met, but he was important to Catherine and therefore to me. The request touched Meredith deeply, not just for its specific content, but for what it represented. Daniel wasn't compartmentalizing his life into separate chapters, but integrating his past love into their present family narrative. I think that would be beautiful, she said sincerely. Our child should know all the strands of love and connection that created their family. When their healthy son was born on a bright September morning, after a straightforward delivery that Daniel witnessed with both terror and wonder, they named him James Edward. Hayes, Margaret Bennett, present at the hospital as an honorary grandmother, wept when she heard the middle name, understanding its significance. Two families becoming one, she said, cradling the newborn with practiced ease. Catherine would be so pleased to see life continuing, evolving, creating new joy without erasing what came before. As James grew from infant to toddler, the Hayes household transformed. The once silent mansion filled with children's laughter, impromptu family dinners, and the beautiful chaos of a home where life was fully embraced rather than carefully controlled. Daniel proved to be an engaged present father who balanced his corporate responsibilities with family priorities, a transformation noted with approval by longtime Apex employees. Richard Blackwood, whose attempts to exploit their relationship for business advantage had consistently failed, eventually overextended his company with risky acquisitions and was forced to sell his controlling interest to investors. The corporate rival who had tried to derail their beginning became a footnote in their story, rather than a continuing antagonist. 2 years after James's birth, the family welcomed a daughter, Lily Margaret Hayes, named for Meredith's college roommate, who had supported her certainty, and Daniel's mother-in-law who had embraced their new beginning. The family was complete, a blend of past and present, memory and creation, certainty and discovery. On James's 5th birthday, as family and friends gathered to celebrate in the gardens that had witnessed so many significant moments in their journey, Meredith found Daniel watching their son with the expression of quiet wonder. "What are you thinking?" she asked, slipping her hand into his. "That words have power," he replied, squeezing her fingers gently. 11 years ago, a little girl with unruly braids made a declaration that seemed impossible. Childish fantasy meeting adult skepticism. Yet here we are, living a reality that grew from that seemingly implausible moment. Meredith smiled, watching as James carefully showed his little sister how to feed the koi in the garden pond. Their heads bent together in concentrated focus, It wasn't just words, though. It was conviction followed by action, patience sustained through years, courage in the face of doubt. Words begin journeys, but choices complete them. Daniel nodded, drawing her closer. You know, in business school they teach about strategic planning, risk assessment, careful analysis.